Hydrogen Fuel Cells by Claire Lawler, Grace Muller, and Emily Stiglich. A fuel cell converts chemical energy from a fuel into electricity for things such as transportation and any portable applications. Hydrogen is the most common in this. Fuel cells have the ability to run as long as hydrogen is supplied. These need inputs of oxygen and fuel in order to run. They act much like a battery.
Hydrogen fuel cells produce electricity through the reaction of hydrogen plus oxygen, creating the end result of energy in water. Here is the story of how hydrogen fuel cells work. The basis of this process is the marriage between hydrogen fuel and the oxygen from the air to produce electricity. This electricity is then used to power many transportation devices. Hydrogen fuel cells are made up of three parts: the anode, the electrode, and the cathode. Now the anode is a negative electrode providing electrons. In this story is the hometown of all electrons. The electrolyte is the center of the fuel cell, and the cathode is a positive electrode which accepts the electrons, or is the desired destination for the electrons in this narrative. To begin, hydrogen flows into the anode, as shown in this diagram. The catalyst on the anode helps separate the hydrogen atoms into protons, hydrogen ions, and electrons. The electrolyte in the center acts as a filter, only allowing the protons to pass through reaching the cathode. The electrons are still left behind in the anode portion of the fuel cell. Now, the electrons and protons in our story are in love. Now, because the protons had to leave the electrons are thinking,
I can't do this long-distance relationship.
So they must find another route to their precious protons. The only other way to rejoin with the protons is to travel through an electric circuit in the form of an electric current, shown here. Once the electrons are now inside the cathode, they must find their beloved protons. So right now we have the protons and the electrons inside the cathode. Next in the process of creating electricity via hydrogen fuel cells is the input of oxygen. Oxygen comes into the cathode and meets up with the protons. The oxygen sees that the protons are sad because they cannot find their electrons. Oxygen says,
I just saw the electrons on my way here.
So then all the electrons and protons happily rejoin by a catalyst of the cathode, and the protons, electrons, and oxygen all combine, forming water and heat, which are the output of this entire process.
There are many advantages to using hydrogen fuel cells. One of these is that they're 80% efficient in converting the potential energy of hydrogen and oxygen into electricity. Also, the only byproduct is water. Another advantage is that the reactants in a fuel cell are added continuously, so the cell produces electricity for as long as it is supplied with fuel. There are also disadvantages, though. For example, scientists must learn how to obtain hydrogen without expending more fossil fuel energy than its use would save. Also, suppliers would need a distribution network to safely deliver hydrogen to consumers. The vehicles would have to be redesigned with much larger fuel tanks in order to achieve the same travel distance per tank. And a tank rupture would possibly lead to the hydrogen catching fire or exploding.
Now a description of the pollutants. Unlike other generators of electricity, fuel cells do not produce any carbon emissions, just heat and water. If all cars were to use this, smog would disappear and pollution would as well.
The end.